The church was quiet, filled with the scent of old wood and fresh lilies. It was one of those cloudy afternoons where the sky felt heavy, like it was mourning along with the people inside. Friends and relatives sat in silence, their eyes red and tired. On the far end, the open casket held the body of Mr. Harold Bennett, a retired schoolteacher beloved by many, especially in the small town where he had lived for over 40 years. He had passed away in his sleep at the age of 78. His funeral was supposed to be simple, respectful, and predictable. But that day, something happened that no one could explain. Among the familiar faces of neighbors, former students, and church members, a man entered. He came alone. Tall, dressed in a clean but outdated suit, his presence was instantly noticed. His face didn't ring a bell to anyone there. Not the pastor, not the family members, not even the lifelong friends who had known Harold since childhood. But despite that, he walked with quiet confidence, as if he belonged. He didn't speak to anyone. He simply took a seat in the back row, placed his hat gently on the pew beside him, and bowed his head. Some thought he was a distant relative. Others assumed maybe Harold had a friend no one knew about. But something about the man was different. His skin had a glow, not of health, but of something else entirely. His eyes, though kind, held a depth that made you feel seen down to your soul. During the service, the stranger sat still, never moving, never fidgeting. His hands remained folded in his lap, and he looked toward the casket with a gaze so intense that a few people turned to watch him instead of the ceremony. When the pastor invited people to share memories, the stranger stood, not quickly, not for attention. He walked calmly to the front, nodded respectfully, and began to speak. Harold was more than a teacher, he said, his voice deep, warm, and clear. He was a man of quiet kindness, a man who believed in lifting others, even when he had nothing left for himself. People looked around, confused. How did this man know that? The stories he told were things no one had ever shared publicly. Private moments, details only Harold and perhaps God would have known. The widow gasped quietly. Tears rolled down her cheeks. The stranger finished with a soft, "He was never alone, not even at the end." Then he bowed his head and stepped back. The room was frozen in silence. Something in his words had touched everyone. When the final hymn was sung and the service ended, people began to look around, but the stranger was gone. No one saw him leave, no footsteps, no door creaking open. He had vanished, as if he had never been there at all. Only the hat on the pew remained. The church remained still long after the service had ended. Mourners whispered among themselves, casting occasional glances at the empty back pew where the stranger had once sat. The hat was still there, perfectly placed, as if it had been set down with reverence and care. Harold's daughter, Emily, approached it slowly, almost cautiously. Her fingers hovered above the worn fabric, hesitant to touch it. Something about it felt sacred, like it didn't belong to this world. When she finally picked it up, a folded piece of paper slipped out and fell gently to the floor. She knelt, heart pounding, and unfolded the note. Written in simple, elegant handwriting were just a few words. He was received with joy. Peace be with you. Her breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from something she couldn't explain, like peace wrapped in mystery. She showed it to the pastor, who read it in silence. He looked at her, eyes wide, then back at the note. "Did you see him leave?" he asked. She shook her head. No one had. No sound, no movement. Just gone. Back home that night, Emily sat with her family in the quiet living room, the fireplace crackling softly. They spoke of the stranger. Each person remembered different details. Her son, Daniel, said the man had smiled at him just once, and in that moment he felt an overwhelming sense of calm. Her mother swore she'd seen light around him. Not from a lamp, she insisted, but from him. Her husband tried to be logical. Maybe he was a hospice worker or someone from the hospital, but no one recalled seeing him during Harold's final days. And the things he knew, those memories, were never shared outside the family. The next day, Emily returned to the church. She asked the staff if anyone had signed the guest book with that name. They flipped through the pages. Nothing. She checked the security cameras outside. The front steps, the side door, the parking lot. Not a single frame showed the man arriving or leaving. It was as though he had never existed. Yet the hat and the note were real. That evening, Emily sat by her father's old chair, holding the note again. The words brought her strange comfort. He was received with joy. She whispered it to herself like a prayer. That night she dreamed of her father. He was standing in a vast field, surrounded by golden light. He looked young again, healthy, happy, and beside him stood the stranger. Only now, with great wings folded behind his back, eyes shining like fire and mercy at once. He looked at her and smiled. She woke up gasping, tears on her cheeks. Not from fear, but from awe. Deep down, she knew. Her father hadn't crossed over alone. He had been escorted, welcomed, celebrated. And whoever that stranger was, he hadn't been a man. He had been sent. The days passed, but the memory of the mysterious man at the funeral refused to fade. Emily found herself returning to the note again and again, reading those few words like a hidden message from another realm. He was received with joy. Each time she read it, her heart stirred, not just with grief, but with something larger, something that whispered of hope. She began speaking more openly with her family about what had happened, no longer brushing it off as coincidence or a trick of emotion. Her teenage daughter, Lily, confessed one evening that she had seen the man from the church once before, outside her grandfather's house, 2 nights before he died. He was standing on the sidewalk, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it was strange, Mom. It was dark out, but I could see him clearly. He was glowing, kind of. I thought maybe I imagined it. Emily stared at her daughter, a chill creeping down her spine. That same glow had been mentioned before. Her mother had seen it, and now Lily too. How could they all be imagining the same thing? Driven by a quiet urgency, Emily began researching angel encounters, online forums, books, documentaries. She found stories eerily similar to her own. People across the world had described strangers at the moment of death, messengers that appeared briefly, then vanished without a trace. Many described them as human at first glance, but with an unexplainable presence, calm, radiant, knowing. She read about nurses who swore that someone came to take the dying patient's hand before they passed, even when no one else was in the room. It made her wonder, had this been happening all along, right under the world's nose? On the 7th night after the funeral, Emily had another dream. This time she was in her father's kitchen, the one he loved so much. She stood near the table, and sunlight poured through the windows, though it was night in real life. In the dream, she heard a voice say her name, not loud but deep, warm, powerful. She turned around, and there he was again, the stranger. But this time he looked different. His eyes were still kind, but behind them was something ancient. He wore the same hat, now glowing faintly, and his body seemed taller, broader, more radiant. "He is with peace," the figure said. "You were seen, you were heard, and you are loved." Emily woke up weeping, her heart full, as though a part of her soul had been stitched back together. The next morning, she didn't question the dream. She didn't call it imagination or stress. She accepted it for what it was, truth. The kind of truth that doesn't require proof, just presence. And in that presence, she found peace. In the days that followed, Emily carried herself differently. She wasn't louder or more confident, but there was a quiet strength in the way she moved, in the way she smiled at strangers and lingered longer with her family during dinner. Something in her heart had shifted, like a stone lifted from her chest. Her father's passing still hurt, but it no longer felt like an ending. It felt like a transition. Still, she had questions that pulled at her curiosity like threads in a sweater. Who was the stranger? Was he truly an angel? And if so, why her? Why her father? On a crisp Sunday morning, she returned to the church where the funeral had taken place. It was quiet, the pews mostly empty, sunlight filtering through the stained glass in soft reds and blues. She sat near the back, watching the dust float in the air, and waited. An older man approached her after the service, Father Thomas, the longtime pastor. She hesitated, then asked if he remembered the man who had stood at the back during the funeral. Father Thomas smiled slowly, thoughtfully. "Yes," he said. "I remember him, but I couldn't tell you who he was. I assumed he was family, but when I looked for him afterward, he was gone. Just disappeared." Emily pressed, "Do you think he was something more?" The pastor didn't laugh or dismiss her. Instead, he nodded, his eyes softening. "I've seen things I can't explain in this place," he said quietly. "Sometimes, when people are at their most broken, heaven opens just enough to let something through." Those words echoed in her for days. Heaven opens just enough. She began writing about the experience, at first in a private journal, then slowly on a small blog she'd kept dormant for years. To her surprise, readers began to respond. Strangers shared their own stories of unexplained comfort, mysterious visitors, and dreams that felt more like visits than imagination. Emily wasn't alone. One comment stood out. A woman from another state described losing her son in a tragic accident. On the night of his funeral, she too saw a man standing near the exit of the church, tall, wearing a hat, eyes full of knowing. "He nodded at me," the woman wrote, "and I felt my heart quiet. I knew my boy wasn't alone." Emily's hands trembled as she read the words. Another confirmation. Another thread in this growing tapestry of invisible grace. As the season shifted toward winter, Emily took walks more often, finding peace in the cold air and barren trees. One morning, as she passed an elderly man on a bench, he looked up and said gently, "Peace finds those who listen." She turned, startled, but the man had already stood and was walking away. She never saw his face clearly. She never caught his name, but she understood the message. Sometimes angels don't appear in robes or with wings. Sometimes they wear hats and offer silent comfort. And sometimes they simply vanish, leaving only peace behind. Weeks turned into months, but the memory of the stranger at the funeral never faded from Emily's mind. It wasn't just his presence. It was what came after. Her life had taken on a softness, a calm awareness that hadn't been there before. Small things felt sacred now. The quiet moments in the morning when the sunlight hit her window just right. The laughter of children in the park. The weight of a hand resting gently on her shoulder when she felt alone, even when no one was there. One evening, she visited her father's grave again. The cemetery was quiet, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She brought flowers, white lilies, his favorite, and knelt beside the stone, tracing his name with her fingers. "I miss you," she whispered, "but I feel like you're not far." A breeze passed through the trees, and with it came the faint scent of something sweet and unplaceable. Not flowers, not earth, something otherworldly. Emily closed her eyes and breathed it in. "Was that you?" she asked aloud. No answer came, but the peace in her chest told her everything she needed to know. As she stood to leave, she noticed a small, hand-carved wooden cross lying beside the grave. She hadn't placed it there. No one in her family had either. It was simple, worn smooth from handling, and tied with a thin piece of gold ribbon. Emily picked it up carefully, turning it in her hand. There was a small note attached, barely legible, written in elegant script. "You are not alone." Her breath caught. She looked around the cemetery, empty save for a groundskeeper in the distance who hadn't noticed her. Emily held the cross to her chest and felt her eyes fill with tears. It was another sign, another whisper from the unseen. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with the cross in front of her and opened her journal. She began writing again, this time not just about the funeral or the stranger, but about everything. The way the world had begun to feel alive with quiet presence. How grief had opened her, instead of closing her. How love didn't vanish when someone died. It changed shape, like light filtered through stained glass. She wrote until the sun began to rise. When she looked up from the pages, she felt something, no, someone, behind her. There was no sound, no movement. But the energy in the room shifted. Slowly she turned her head. No one was there. And yet the air was thick with warmth and stillness. Her heart didn't race in fear. Instead, it beat steady, as if in rhythm with something ancient and divine. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." A gentle knock echoed once from the inside of her heart, like the soft beat of wings. Emily knew then that this was not the end of her story with the stranger, or with the realm beyond. It was only the beginning. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed permanently since the funeral. She found herself waking up earlier, drawn to the stillness of dawn, as if something sacred waited for her in those quiet hours. Every morning she would sit by her window with a cup of tea, the small wooden cross resting in her palm, and she would whisper a thank you to the air, not entirely sure who she was thanking, but fully convinced that someone was listening. One morning, as she prepared to leave for work, she found an envelope tucked between her front door and the frame. It had no postage, no name, only the word Emily, written in the same elegant script as the note from the cemetery. Her heart began to pound, not in fear, but with the weight of wonder. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single sheet of thick parchment paper, and on it were just a few words. "Follow the quiet places." That was it. No signature, no explanation. But Emily understood. She didn't know how, but she did. That week she started walking different paths home. Instead of taking the bus, she walked through the city, cutting through gardens, alleys, church courtyards, anywhere that felt still, undisturbed. In one of those walks, she passed an old, ivy-covered chapel she had never noticed before. Something about it pulled her in. She stepped inside, finding the pews empty and dust dancing in the golden light that filtered through stained glass windows. A single candle burned at the altar. Emily sat down without thinking, and immediately felt tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't sadness, it was release. She stayed there for nearly an hour, her thoughts quiet, her heart soft, her breath steady. And when she finally stood to leave, she noticed something new. Someone had placed a folded cloth on the pew beside hers. It was a handkerchief, embroidered with a small golden feather. The symbol struck her like lightning. It matched the ribbon from the wooden cross. She pressed it to her chest, eyes wide. Who was doing this? How did they know where she'd be? Or was it who she thought it might be? That night, Emily couldn't sleep again, but this time she didn't resist it. She lit a candle, placed both the cross and the handkerchief in front of her, and whispered into the quiet room, "I'm listening." As if in answer, a warm breeze swept gently through the closed window. The flame of the candle flickered but didn't go out, and once again, the air shifted, soft, alive, and holy. A voice, not heard but felt deep in her chest, murmured a single word that shook her to her core. Soon. She sat there for a long time, unmoving, surrounded by the invisible presence that had entered her life so subtly, yet so powerfully. Whatever was coming next, Emily knew it was no longer just about grief or healing. She had stepped into something ancient and divine, and now there was no going back. The next morning felt different from the moment Emily opened her eyes. There was a stillness in the air, not the silence of an empty house, but a peaceful quiet that felt placed, like someone had hushed the world just for her. As she moved through her morning routine, she noticed small, almost imperceptible signs. Her coffee brewed faster, the birds outside chirped in a perfect melody, and the breeze carried the faint scent of lilies, though none were anywhere near. She didn't question it anymore. Something was guiding her, something sacred. That afternoon, as she passed the same chapel she had visited days before, she saw the door was ajar. This time, there was a light inside. Not the dusty golden glow from the windows, but a brighter, whiter glow, almost too pure to be earthly. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The church was empty again, but the air felt charged. Her eyes were drawn to the altar, where someone had left a new object, a small glass vial filled with clear water, glowing faintly in the light. Beside it was a folded note. Hands trembling, she opened it. It read, "You are closer than you know." Her breath caught in her throat. Closer to what? The veil between her world and something divine felt thinner than ever. That night, sleep came easily, but deep in the middle of it, she was stirred awake, not by a sound, but by a feeling. A presence filled her room. Her eyes opened slowly, and though the space was dark, a soft glow illuminated one corner of her bedroom. And there he stood, the stranger from the funeral. But this time, he wasn't dressed in black. He wore white robes that shimmered like woven light, and his eyes carried the weight of eternity. His presence was neither frightening nor overwhelming. It was comforting, right? She didn't move, didn't speak, and yet she knew she was safe. He stepped closer, never breaking eye contact, and knelt beside her bed. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, layered with something otherworldly. "You were heard." Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. She didn't need to ask what he meant. Her pleas, her cries in the nights after James passed, her longing for a sign, it had all been received. "You asked for guidance," he continued, "and you followed it. That takes courage, Emily." She tried to speak, but no words formed. Instead, she nodded, overwhelmed by emotion. He extended a hand, not touching her, but pointing toward the cross and handkerchief she had kept on her nightstand. They glowed faintly in response. "You have walked through grief with grace," he said. "Now you will walk in light." Before she could react, he stood and stepped back. His form began to fade, not vanishing, but becoming light, pure, bright, and infinite. And then, as quickly as he had come, he was gone. Emily sat in the silence of her room, the air still pulsing with a divine echo. Something holy had passed through her life, and she knew, without question, that this was only the beginning. The next days were unlike anything Emily had ever known. The heaviness that had clung to her since James's passing had begun to lift, not because she forgot, but because something had shifted deep within her. The memory of the angelic figure, no longer just a mysterious stranger, remained vivid in her heart. His words echoed in her ears every morning, "You will walk in light." She no longer felt alone in her grief. There was now a quiet companionship that followed her, like an invisible hand resting gently on her shoulder. She found herself smiling more often, even humming soft tunes that James used to sing while cooking. It wasn't forced. It was as if the pain had been transformed into something sacred. One morning, as she opened her kitchen window, the sunlight poured in, casting a golden glow across the same space where she and James used to drink coffee together. She stood there in silence, letting the warmth fill her chest. Then, for the first time in weeks, she took out the old photo album. Page after page, she flipped through their life, weddings, birthdays, vacations, and instead of crying, she whispered words of gratitude. "Thank you for loving me this deeply," she said aloud, not sure if she was speaking to James or to the heavens, or both. That same afternoon, Emily visited the chapel once more. The place had become a quiet refuge for her. When she entered, she noticed something new on one of the wooden pews. A single feather, pristine white, resting perfectly still despite the breeze from the open doors. She approached it slowly, her breath catching. It looked like no ordinary feather. It shimmered faintly, and as she touched it, a warmth spread through her fingers. No note this time, no voice. Just the feather and a peace that settled over her like a soft blanket. Emily held it close, heart swelling with something too big for words. She knew, instinctively, this was not random. It was left for her, a reminder, a reassurance. That night, Emily stood by her window, holding the feather, looking up at the stars. For the first time in a long while, she spoke aloud without fear. "I'm ready," she said. "Whatever this new path is, I'll walk it." The wind stirred gently outside. Somewhere in the silence, there was the faintest sound, almost like wings, not thunderous, not dramatic, just a gentle rustle, as if the heavens had responded. Emily closed her eyes and smiled. Grief had not left her, but it had changed form. Love had not died, it had expanded. And now, she wasn't just a woman who lost her husband. She was a woman who had been touched by the divine. The kitchen, the chapel, the feather, each had become sacred points on a map she hadn't known she was following, and something inside her whispered that the journey was far from over. Since that night, when the stranger appeared in her bedroom bathed in shimmering light, Emily's world had shifted in ways she could barely understand. The ordinary moments now felt extraordinary. Every breath, Every whisper of the wind seemed to carry a message meant just for her. But beneath the calm, questions stirred like restless shadows. Who was this mysterious figure? Why had he come to her father's funeral, and why was he still present, guiding her through her grief? She spent her days wandering quiet streets and sacred spaces, drawn to the stillness that felt alive. The chapel with its dust-kissed pews became her refuge. Each visit brought new signs, small tokens left behind, gentle reminders that she was not alone. The feather-embroidered handkerchief, the wooden cross, the vial of glowing water, all spoke a language beyond words. They told her a story of protection, of unseen guardians watching over the ones we love. One chilly morning, as frost glazed the window panes, Emily found herself seated before the altar, hands folded in silent prayer. Her thoughts turned to Harold Bennett, the man who had touched so many lives with quiet kindness. She remembered the stranger's words at the funeral. He was never alone, not even at the end. Those words echoed in her heart, a balm against the ache of loss. Suddenly, the chapel door creaked open, and a soft breeze swept through the room. Emily's eyes lifted, searching the dim light. There, standing in the doorway, was the stranger once more, no longer a mere visitor, but a presence fully revealed. His robes shimmered with radiant light, and his eyes held the endless depth of eternity. He smiled gently. "Emily," he said, his voice like the warmth of sunlight after a long winter. "You have walked a path few dare to tread. You have faced the darkness, yet you have chosen to carry the light." She blinked back tears. Words caught in her throat. The stranger stepped closer, extending a hand that seemed to glow with divine energy. "Your father's journey is not over, and neither is yours. The veil between worlds is thin for those who listen with their hearts." Emily felt a surge of peace wash over her. For the first time since Harold's passing, she understood. The stranger was not a ghost, nor a figment of grief, but a messenger of hope, a guardian sent to escort her father into the light and to guide her as she embraced a new chapter. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because your love is a beacon," he replied. "Because your faith, even in doubt, opens doors unseen." As he spoke, the chapel filled with a brilliant glow. Emily felt herself lifted, weightless, connected to something vast and eternal. She was no longer alone. Around her, the air hummed with the quiet song of angels. Before the light faded, the stranger placed a small glowing feather in her palm. "This is a symbol," he said. "Carry it always. When the world grows dark, let it remind you of the light within." With that, he slowly vanished, leaving Emily bathed in warmth and hope. She knelt, clutching the feather close to her heart, tears streaming freely. The journey was far from over. But now, she had the courage to walk it. Emily held the glowing feather tightly in her palm, feeling its warmth spread through her fingers and into her heart. The stranger's words echoed softly in her mind, reminding her of the light she carried within, even in the darkest times. She understood now that grief was not an end, but a passage, a journey toward healing and deeper connection. Over the next days, Emily noticed subtle changes in her life. Mornings felt lighter, and her steps carried a new purpose. She began reaching out to others in her community, sharing stories of hope and comfort. People listened, drawn to the quiet strength she now radiated. One afternoon, as she visited the chapel once more, Emily found the small vial of glowing water waiting for her again on the altar. This time, beside it, lay a handwritten letter addressed to her. With trembling hands, she unfolded the delicate paper. The letter spoke of love transcending death, of angels walking unseen among us, and of the power each person holds to be a light in someone else's darkness. It urged her to keep faith, to trust the unseen, and to walk boldly in the path that had been laid before her. Emily smiled through tears. She realized the stranger had not only come for her father, but for her as well, to awaken her spirit and give her a mission of compassion. That evening, Emily sat with her family around the dinner table, the glow from the feather resting in a small glass bowl at the center. Her daughter Lily asked, "Mom, do you really think he was an angel?" Emily nodded softly, feeling the truth in her bones. "I do. And I think he's still watching over us." Days turned into weeks, and Emily's story began to spread beyond the small town. Messages poured in from strangers who had felt similar encounters, people who had lost loved ones but found comfort in the possibility of angels walking among them. Emily created a blog to share her experiences and those stories, building a community of hope and healing. One crisp morning, as she walked along a tree-lined path near the chapel, Emily spotted a little girl sitting alone on a bench, tears glistening on her cheeks. Without hesitation, Emily sat beside her and gently took her hand. "You're not alone," she whispered. "Sometimes the angels come when we least expect them." The girl looked up, eyes wide with wonder, and smiled faintly. Emily felt the warmth of the feather pulse in her pocket, a reminder of the journey she had walked and the light she now carried within. At that moment, she knew the stranger's visit was not just a fleeting miracle, but a beginning of something eternal. Love never truly leaves us. It transforms, it guides, and it lights the way, even through the darkest nights. Emily stood and looked up at the sky where soft clouds drifted lazily, and sunlight broke through in golden beams. She whispered a final thank you, feeling peace settle deeply into her soul. Her father was at rest, surrounded by light, and she too was ready to live fully again, with hope, with faith, and with love as her guide. The stranger had vanished from sight, but his presence remained, in every quiet breeze, in every gentle glow, in every whispered prayer. The angel encounter had changed her life forever, and now she walked forward carrying the light, for herself, for her family, and for everyone who needed to believe that even in loss, there is grace.